Last night, the United States military struck Iranian missile launch sites and boats that were placing mines in the Strait of Hormuz. At the same moment those strikes were happening, Iran's negotiators were sitting in Doha, Qatar, in active peace talks with Qatari mediators. Marco Rubio, speaking to reporters on a plane in New Delhi, said the deal is down to disagreements over a word, a sentence. Trump posted on Truth Social that negotiations were proceeding nicely. Hours later, explosions were reported near Bandar Abbas. The IRGC claimed it shot down an American MQ-9 Reaper drone, fired at an F-35 fighter jet, and forced an RQ-4 intelligence drone to turn around. Iran's foreign ministry accused the United States of a clear violation of the ceasefire. The IRGC issued a statement saying it considers its right to a reciprocal response legitimate and certain. And the ceasefire that has been in place since April 8th, the ceasefire that the entire peace deal framework is built on top of, is simultaneously being described as still in effect by CENTCOM and is clearly violated by Tehran. Both sides struck each other last night. Both sides say the other side started it. The deal that was one sentence away is now surrounded by the same military activity that has been escalating since the ceasefire began. And nobody outside of classified briefing rooms knows whether last night was the end of the ceasefire, or simply the latest in the pattern that has defined every week since April 8th. To understand what last night means and what comes next, you need to understand three things. What specifically happened, what the legal and operational logic of self-defense strikes during a ceasefire actually is, and what the full pattern of ceasefire violations since April 8th tells you about the structural stability of a truce, that both sides keep saying is still in effect even as they keep shooting at each other inside it. Start with what CENTCOM confirmed happened on the night of May 25th. U.S. forces conducted what CENTCOM spokesman Captain Tim Hawkins described as self-defense strikes in southern Iran. The targets were specific and operationally significant. 2 Iranian boats were caught in the act of emplacing mines in the waters of the Strait of Hormuz. Simultaneously, a surface-to-air missile battery in Bandar Abbas, an Iranian SAM site that had targeted American aircraft operating in the area. CENTCOM's statement was brief and used precise language that tells you what the Pentagon's legal theory of the action is. Not a resumption of Operation Epic Fury. Self-defense under the right of any military force to protect its personnel and assets from active attack or imminent threat. The self-defense designation is not incidental. It is the legal architecture that allows the United States to conduct kinetic operations during the ceasefire, without formally declaring the ceasefire over. The ceasefire framework negotiated on April 8th did not include a mutual cessation of self-defense rights. It suspended offensive operations. The American position is that striking boats actively emplacing mines and a missile battery actively targeting American aircraft falls within the self-defense exception and does not constitute a ceasefire violation. Iran's position is the opposite. Tehran's foreign ministry said the U.S. committed a clear violation of the ceasefire in the Hormuz region over the past 48 hours, and cited repeated naval harassment of Iranian commercial vessels alongside the strikes. The IRGC's claimed to have shot down an MQ-9 Reaper drone and fired at an F-35 and RQ-4 during the same operational window. 2 Iranian boats were caught in the act of emplacing mines in the waters of the Strait of Hormuz. Both boats were eliminated. Simultaneously, a surface-to-air missile battery in Bandar Abbas, an Iranian SAM site that had targeted American aircraft operating in the area, was struck and destroyed. CENTCOM's statement was brief and used precise language that tells you what the Pentagon's legal theory of the action is. Self-defense. Not offensive operations. Not a resumption of Operation Epic Fury. Self-defense under the right of any military force to protect its personnel and assets from active attack or imminent threat. The self-defense designation is not incidental. It is the legal architecture that allows the United States to conduct kinetic operations during the ceasefire, without formally declaring the ceasefire over. The ceasefire framework negotiated on April 8th did not include a mutual cessation of self-defense rights. It suspended offensive operations. The American position is that striking boats actively emplacing mines and a missile battery actively targeting American aircraft falls within the self-defense exception and does not constitute a ceasefire violation. Iran's position is the opposite. Tehran's foreign ministry said the U.S. committed a clear violation of the ceasefire in the Hormuz region over the past 48 hours, and cited repeated naval harassment of Iranian commercial vessels alongside the strikes. The IRGC's claimed to have shot down an MQ-9 Reaper drone and fired at an F-35 and RQ-4 during the same operational window. Represents Iran's own exercise of what it considers self-defense rights during the ceasefire. 2 sides conducting military operations against each other's assets and each calling it self-defense. While insisting the ceasefire remains in effect is the defining paradox of the post-April 8th environment. And last night was not the first time this paradox produced explosions near the strait. The pattern of ceasefire violations since April 8th is not a series of isolated incidents. It is a sustained low-level military campaign conducted by both sides within the diplomatic fiction of a ceasefire, that neither side has been willing to formally end, because ending it formally would require one of them to own the restart of full-scale operations. Within hours of Trump announcing the April 8th ceasefire, Iranian missile and drone attacks were reported against Gulf state targets. Iran accused the UAE of striking an oil refinery on Levan Island in the opening hours of the ceasefire. By early May, the ceasefire had been tested severely enough that CENTCOM confirmed U.S. destroyers and Iranian forces had traded direct fire in the Strait of Hormuz, a confrontation serious enough that PBS News described it as a serious test of the ceasefire in their headline. On May 8th, U.S. forces fired on and disabled 2 Iranian oil tankers after exchanging fire with Iranian forces overnight. The UAE reported another Iranian missile and drone attack the same day. 3 people wounded after air defenses engaged 2 ballistic missiles and 3 drones. Satellite images reviewed by the Associated Press showed what appeared to be an oil slick emanating from the western side of Kharg Island, covering roughly 95 square kilometers of the Persian Gulf following one of these engagements. The ceasefire that has been in place since April 8th has included destroyer-level naval engagements, disabled and sunk Iranian tankers, Gulf state missile and drone attacks, and now last night's strikes on mine-laying boats and a SAM battery. CENTCOM has said after each incident that the ceasefire remains in effect. Iran has said after each incident that the ceasefire has been violated. The gap between those two descriptions is not a failure of communication. It is a deliberate ambiguity that both sides are maintaining because the alternative, formally acknowledging that the ceasefire is over, requires one of them to either resume full-scale offensive operations or formally surrender the military leverage that the ceasefire fighting is generating. Now understand why mines specifically tell you something important about what Iran was doing last night, and what the strategic logic behind mine-laying during a ceasefire actually is. Naval mines are not a weapon of immediate engagement. They are a weapon of future control. You do not lay mines to win a fight that is happening right now. You lay mines to shape the operational environment of a fight that might happen later, or to restrict access to a waterway that you intend to keep restricting regardless of whatever diplomatic framework is nominally in place. The IRGC boats that U.S. forces found in placing mines in the strait last night were not responding to last night's American military activity. They were executing a pre-planned operation to seed the strait's navigable channels with mines that would remain as a threat to commercial and military shipping for weeks or months after being placed. Mine-laying during a ceasefire is not a violation of the ceasefire in the heat of a tactical moment. It is a strategic operation conducted under ceasefire cover to improve Iran's operational position for whatever environment follows the ceasefire, whether that is a resumed conflict, a continued stalemate, or a post-deal environment where the PGSA's transit authority needs physical enforcement capability. The mines that were being placed last night were going into water that the entire peace deal assumes will be reopened to free commercial navigation. The mine-laying operation is incompatible with the deal both sides are supposedly one sentence away from signing. You do not cede an international waterway you are about to voluntarily reopen with mines that will threaten every commercial vessel that transits it. The mine-laying is the IRGC's operational answer to the civilian government's diplomatic flexibility. While the Foreign Ministry's delegation was in Doha discussing the wording of the reopening agreement, the IRGC's naval forces were in the strait placing the weapons that make reopening operationally complicated regardless of what the diplomatic document says. This is not a coincidence. This is the institutional split in Iranian decision-making that the previous video in this series explained in full. The diplomats in Doha and the mine-laying boats in the strait are pursuing incompatible objectives simultaneously because they report to different authorities. The SAM battery strike adds a second dimension to last night's operational picture that the coverage has underreported. A surface-to-air missile battery in Bandar Abbas targeted American aircraft operating in the area. CENTCOM struck and destroyed it. The significance of this specific target is what it tells you about the state of Iran's reconstituted air defense capability, and about the operational environment for any potential second strike wave. The EA-18G Growler electronic warfare operations and the F-35 strike campaigns of Operation Epic Fury systematically degraded Iran's integrated air defense network over 38 days of intensive operations. The CENTCOM commander testified to Congress that the air defense network was severely degraded. A SAM battery in Bandar Abbas that was actively targeting American aircraft last night is evidence that the reconstitution that the classified intelligence assessment described as faster than expected is producing operational air defense capability. Not just launches being dug out and drones being assembled, but active radar-guided missile systems capable of engaging American aircraft. That is a more significant data point than the targeting itself. The SAM battery that tried to engage American aircraft last night represents the reconstituted air defense capability that the ceasefire has allowed to develop, and CENTCOM destroyed it in self-defense, which is the correct operational response, and simultaneously the clearest possible evidence that the intelligence community's reconstitution timeline assessment of months, not years, is accurate. Iran's drone and aircraft claims deserve specific examination because they tell you what Iran wants the narrative to be regardless of what actually happened. The IRGC claimed last night that it shot down an MQ-9 Reaper drone, fired at an F-35 jet, and forced an RQ-4 Global Hawk intelligence collection drone to turn around. These claims were released in the same IRGC statement that warned of the legitimate and certain right to retaliate. The MQ-9 Reaper is not a stealth aircraft. It is a medium-altitude, long-endurance unmanned aerial vehicle that operates in contested airspace regularly and whose loss would not represent a significant degradation of American operational capability. If the IRGC did shoot down an MQ-9, it is a tactical success with no strategic significance. The claim about firing at an F-35 and forcing it to leave Iranian airspace is an IRGC narrative claim with no independent verification. The F-35's survivability against Iranian air defense systems has been demonstrated operationally over 38 days of Operation Epic Fury, during which no F-35 was confirmed shot down or damaged. An IRGC claim that it fired at an F-35 and the F-35 left is indistinguishable from an F-35 completing its mission profile. The aircraft claims serve a specific domestic and regional audience. They are designed to communicate to the Iranian public and to the IRGC's institutional constituency that the Revolutionary Guard is actively defending Iranian airspace and successfully challenging American military capability during a period when the civilian government is in Doha discussing the terms of what the IRGC considers a capitulation. The claims are the institutional parallel to the mine-laying operation. One operates kinetically, one operates informationally. Both serve the same purpose of demonstrating IRGC agency and capability during a diplomatic process the IRGC does not control, and why last night makes the 72-hour window the most consequential period since the ceasefire began. It suggests that the substantive issues, the Strait framework, the sanctions structure, the uranium stockpile disposal commitment, disputes over wording in diplomatic documents are not trivial. The word or sentence in question likely involves the nuclear enrichment moratorium duration, each of which has been the subject of the IRGC civilian government split that produces the pattern of agreed language being immediately contradicted by IRGC-affiliated media. It is about how the provision is described in a way that the civilian government can present as an acceptable outcome. 3 outcomes now exist in the next 72 hours, and the events of last night have made all 3 more probable simultaneously. Produces a military response that triggers a broader escalation, the deal is possible. The civilian government in Doha cannot continue negotiating through. This outcome ends the deal framework. It requires both sides to maintain the fiction of a ceasefire that is being actively violated because neither side is ready to own the consequences of formally ending it. Both of those things are simultaneously true this morning. And which one arrives first is the only question that matters right now, and restarts the decision chain that leads back to the B2S at Diego Garcia and the authorization that has not been transmitted. The third outcome is the continuation of the pattern, another exchange of fire followed by both sides insisting the ceasefire remains in effect, another deadline extension, another week of mining and countermining and shooting and claiming self-defense while the diplomats work the wording. In air-conditioned rooms in Qatar, this is the outcome that the previous 7 weeks of ceasefire have produced consistently. Here is where things stand as of this morning. American forces struck Iranian mine-laying boats and a SAM battery in the Strait of Hormuz last night. Iran claims it shot down an MQ-9, fired at an F-35, and forced an RQ-4 to retreat. The IRGC has formally threatened retaliation and called its right to respond legitimate and certain. Iran's foreign ministry called it a clear ceasefire violation. CENTCOM says the ceasefire remains in effect. The Iranian delegation is in Doha. Rubio says it is down to a word. Trump says negotiations are proceeding nicely. Fires were reported near Bandar Abbas. An oil slick from Kharg Island has now been documented by satellite imagery. And somewhere in the Strait of Hormuz, the waters where the mines were being placed last night are now slightly safer for shipping, until the next IRGC boat attempts to place the next one. The deal is 1 sentence away. The war is 1 escalation away. Both of those things are simultaneously true this morning. And which one arrives first is the only question that matters right now.